before we go ahead with the insoluble drug and what are the approaches, and then we focus on the nanomilling approaches, we must look toward the biopharmaceutical classification system. So this system systematically classify various drug molecules into 4 classes based on the solubility and permeability. And why we classify the drugs based on solubility and permeability? Because for the oral route of administration, these 2 factors are very, very important for the bioavailability, for the prediction of the bioavailability. So as you see that there are 4 classes: BCS class 1, BCS class 2, BCS class 3, and class 4. So class 1 drug candidates have no problem in the formulation in terms of limited bioavailability because they are very good candidates. They have high solubility and high permeability. Whereas in case of the BCS class 2 drug molecules, they have low solubility, but they have high permeability. Whereas in case of the class 3 drug molecules, they have high solubility but low permeability, whereas class 4 are the most notorious, or you can say most problematic drug molecules, because they have both low solubility and low permeability. So now if we want to improve the performance of such drugs, then we have to focus on the problem area. And the problem area for the BCS class 2 drug is low solubility. So based on the pharmaceutical approaches, we must try something that the low solubility of the drug can be enhanced, can be improved. We have to use some formulation approaches so that we do not alter the chemical structure of the drug, but at the same time, we can have better solubility and therefore better dissolution and ultimately better absorption and bioavailability from such problematic drugs. In case of class 3, the permeability is a problem. So here, if the drug candidate belongs to class 3, then we have to focus on the approaches which will improve the permeability. Now, why we concerned with the class 2 more, class 2 or 4 basically. So class 2, most of the drug candidates belong to class 2. Say for example, the most widely used category of drug, that is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, etc. Right? And that's why we focus on that. So this classification was given by Amidon and co-workers between 1995, and it came into effect in 2000 when FDA approved this for the waiver, etc. When the companies file the ANDA, or for the reformulated drug when they file the applications for the marketing of the dosage form. Now, this classification was based on solubility and permeability, and it uses the term high solubility and high permeability. So what is high or low is a qualitative term. So how can you define it in terms of a numeric value as per the BCS classification? So highly soluble is when the highest dose strength of the drug is soluble in 250 ml or less of aqueous media. And the aqueous media we use is in the range of pH 1 to 6.0. So as per the BCS classification, we usually use 3 pH, 1.2, 4.5, and 6.8. Right? And that's why we can say that this dose solubility ratio, that is 250 ml. So it must be less than that. If it is more than that, the drug has the solubility issue. And why the BCS classification says 250 ml? Because it is approximately a glass of water that usually patient takes along with a tablet or capsule, which is the most widely used oral dosage form. And this is how this classification defines the highly soluble drug molecules. In case of highly permeable, the extent of absorption in human is determined to be 90% or more of the administered dose. So these 2 are the criteria which determines whether the drug will fall in class 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now see, when we try to deliver the insoluble APIs, or the APIs which are slightly soluble or which are sparingly soluble, there are so many approaches which are reported in the literature. Many of them are already successful approaches. They are already available in the market. You will find the dosage form with various salts and some of the pH modification. Micronization is a very old and proven approach. Amorphous solid dispersions and cytotoxin complexation are also one of the successful approaches, and you will see some of the drug products in the market. Co-solvency is usually used, but it is usually limited to the liquid dosage forms, whereas the newer and more powerful, you can say more effective dosage form, more effective approach is based on the nanotechnology. So here we are talking about nanomilling as one of the nanotechnology-based approach. Now, before going to the nanomilling, we should know what is the meaning of nano and what is meant by the nanonization, right? As such, there is no globally accepted definition for the nano or nanoparticle. Usually, you will see that the particles which fall in the range of 1 nanometer to 1000 nanometer, that you can say that approximately less than 1 micrometer particle, they are considered to be nano. Whereas when we say nanonization, so usually we talk about when the particle size downs to the submicron range, that is the range which is usually considered 100 to 500 nanometers. Whereas most of the nanotherapeutics, whether they are nanoparticles, liposomes, or what you can say polymeric missiles, etc., they all fall between a broad range of 1 to 1000 nanometer. However, recently the European Union has given for the nanocosmeceuticals the definition that it should be less than 100 nanometers. But in terms of the nanotherapeutics or the dosage form and drug delivery, many a times the range is broader, that is between 1 to 1000 nanometers. You can see here that most of the therapeutics have various range. They can be formulated in a range because the particle size depends on many of the formulation factors, the processing parameters, the method of the preparation, etc. Right? So depending on this, basically this 100 to 500 nanometer is the colloidal particle size, you can say. So they exert usually quite different physicochemical properties compared to the bigger particle size. But as the colloidal particle size also show up to 1000 nanometer, and that's why we consider the broad particle size range as 1 to 1000 nanometers. Now, sometimes we think that there is no difference between the nanocrystal and nanoparticle. You maybe came around listening these terms like nanoparticle, nanocrystal, nanosuspension. So here we are concerned with these three terms. So nanoparticle is a broad term. Right? All the particle sizes which falls in the nano sizes or nanoscale dimensions, they are known as nanoparticles. For the purpose of this presentation, we are more concerned with the nanosuspensions and nanocrystals. So nanosuspensions contain the drug nanocrystals, stabilizers. And these stabilizers can be either surfactant or polymer or combination of both surfactants and polymers, along with a liquid dispersion medium. So basically the nanosuspensions are liquid. That means an aqueous dispersion medium in which the particles following in the colloidal range are dispersed. Whereas in case of nanocrystals, when we dry the nanosuspensions, we get the dried solidified product, which is known as nanocrystal. Right? So as such, there is no difference between nanosuspension and nanocrystal. However, you can say that when you expose the nanosuspension to the solidification process, there are other parameters and you must check that the particle size should not be changed. And when you solidify the nanosuspension to achieve the solid nanocrystals, which can then be incorporated into various pharmaceutical dosage forms like tablet, capsule, etc. Right? So the limitation of nanosuspension is that it is in liquid form, right? So sometimes it is hard to formulate it as a tablet. Whereas when you convert the nanosuspensions into the dried nanoparticle, they are known as nanocrystals. So here in the diagram, you can see that there are various nanoparticles. right? So we can say in broad terms that all the nanocrystals are nanoparticles, but all nanoparticles are not nanocrystals, right? Because usually the nanoparticles also take into account, or in their formulation, you use some of the polymers or some of the matrix or carrier materials in their formulation. Whereas in case of nanocrystals, we do not use any carriers. They are pure drug nanocrystals. The only excipient that you use is the stabilizer, which is either the surfactant or polymer. And that also is used in a very low concentration. And the purpose is the stabilization, right? So this is the differences between these two terms, that what is meant by nanoparticles, nanocrystals, and nanosuspensions, although all falls in the nanoscale dimensions. Now, for the production of the nanocrystals, there are two approaches which have extensively researched by various researchers, like bottom-up approaches and the top-down approaches. So as the name suggests, in case of the bottom-up approaches, the particles will be grown from the smaller to the larger, right? Say, for example, you have a solution and you go for the precipitation by the anti-solvent method. So this anti-solvent precipitation is the most commonly used method for the nanocrystal production in the laboratories, whereas any of the bottom-up approach till now not approved by FDA for marketing. They are only under the research. Now come to the top-down approaches. So in this case, we take the raw micron size of the drug particles and we apply the particle size reduction approaches such as nanomilling or high pressure homogenization, that is known as HPH. So these two are very, very successful approaches, and more than 12 dosage forms are available in the market which are FDA approved, right? So because of this method, especially the nanomilling method, has their own advantages. We will see as we proceed further that what are the advantages and what makes this method quite distinct compared to the other approaches. Because top-down method, first of all, it is the industrially feasible method. And in this case, it is easier to control the size and it avoids the organic solvent. You are not going to use organic solvent in preparation of the nanocrystals when you use the nanomilling method, that is the wet media milling or wet bead milling. Sometimes it is also known as the pearl milling, right? So in this case, WMM, that is the wet media milling, or HPH, that is the high pressure homogenization. Among these two, WMM is a very, very widely successful approach because many of the dosage forms are available in the market. So this is the basic difference, although both method has certain advantages and disadvantages. For example, in case of the bottom-up approaches, you have low energy input, and it is also useful for the thermolabile drugs. Whereas at the same time, the bottom-up approaches requires the organic solvent, and also the crystal growth needs to be controlled. So as the production size is increased at the production level, at the manufacturing level, it is difficult to control the crystal growth. And that's why these approaches are not so successful. Also, when you incorporate large amount of the organic solvent for the preparation, you have to evaporate that also. And all these steps also adds to the production cost into the nanocrystal manufacturing, whereas top-down approaches are relatively more industrially feasible approaches. Now, why we say that nanomilling is a nearly universal approach? Because this approach can be virtually applied to every drug. Because every drug can be comminuted, every drug can be size reduced from micron size particle to the finer size particle, regardless of its solubility. You need not to worry whether the drug is soluble in water, or you need not to find out the organic solvent. My drug will be soluble in which solvent? It is not an important question when you adopt the nanomilling as the particle size reduction approach. And that's why we say that the top-down approach has wider commercial and industrial applications than the bottom-up approach, where fine particles are constructed from the dissolved molecular state. So this is a difference. That's why we say bottom up. The particle size grows up from the dissolved to the some nanoscale sizes. Whereas in case of top down, we are reducing the size of the particles. Now, why we say that nanomilling is a superior approach? Because as we discussed, one parameter is the universality of this approach, because it can be just applied to any insoluble API, even the APIs which have solubility less than 200 microgram per ml, right? And this attribute makes the nanomilling as a very appealing and fast-line approach for the solubilization of insoluble drugs. Also, this method has other advantages, like it doesn't use any harsh organic solvents, or it doesn't use the pH extremes. Most of the nanomill suspensions are aqueous based. Most of the time it is water itself. Some researchers have also tried PEG, that is polyethylene glycol, that is also aqueous in nature, although not water, or sometimes used, but most of the time they are water. And you can load high API concentration in the nanomill equipment, ranging from the 5% to 40% and more, weight by weight, right? And you usually get the 100% of the drug loading. That is the advantage of this method. Also, you can say that it is relatively easy to scale up. Easy in terms that once you optimize the critical process parameters of a nanomilling process for a particular drug, then the reproducibility of the batch is quite better compared to other methods, right? Also, you can say that the commercial nanomilling equipment uses the recirculation process, and it is possible to have many more cycles of the nanomilling until you get the particle size of your desired scale, or you can convert it into a continuous process rather than the batch process. Also, once you optimize the parameters, all the critical process parameters of the nanomilling, like bead size, time of the milling, what is the percentage of the drug loading, etc., and then you can have better reproducibility of the production batches. And that's why we say that it is industrially feasible approach. Now, compared to the other approach, how the nanocrystals improve oral absorption, right? Because we talk that this approach is used when the drug has a solubility problem. So we know that if the drug has a solubility problem, that means it will show the dissolution rate limited absorption. That means before it reaches to the absorption stage, the dissolution will become very, very slow. And that's why we say that it is the dissolution rate limited absorption. So what we need to do is we have to focus on enhancing the dissolution. So dissolution will be enhanced once we enhance the solubility, right? So ultimately the goal is to have better oral absorption or to have better oral bioavailability. So basically the nanocrystals uses two major mechanisms for improving the oral absorption. That is, it enhances the solubility and dissolution rate of a drug. And secondly, it enhances the bioadhesion of the drug to the intestinal walls. Now, the drug is dissolved from the formulation into aqueous digestive fluid, right? From the dosage form. When we swallow the dosage form, it will be first exposed to the digestive fluid. And then it is transported across the gastrointestinal epithelium into the blood circulation. Whereas it doesn't directly affect the permeability, but it will improve the bioadhesion of the drug particles to the intestinal wall. We will see one by one that what is the mechanism behind the enhanced solubility and what is the mechanism behind the enhanced bioadhesion of the nanocrystals. So as you see in this paragraph, we know that this is a particle size reduction approach. So the first basic thing we think is it will give you the amorphous surface area and enormous surface free energy. That means the surface area to volume ratio will be quite better compared to what you get for the micron size particles, right? So because of this enormously high surface area, there will be exposition of these particles or new surfaces to the, which will give you the enhanced dissolution. So because of this enhanced surface area, it will be exposed in a better way to the fluid and it will enhance the dissolution. Now, because of this, they will show various parameters, like it will show large surface area because of the particle size reduction. At the same time, the very important effect it shows is on the dissolution velocity, on the saturation solubility, and it also decreases the diffusional layer distance, and it also increases the concentration gradient between the gut lumen and blood, right? And secondly, as we see in the previous slide, it increases the adhesiveness to the cell membrane or surfaces to the gut wall. So all this dissolution enhancement and adhesiveness both will help to increase the passive diffusion. And that's why it will give the better absorption. Now see in this slide, when we go toward micronization to the nanonization, we have taken here an approximate size of particle 100 micrometer. If you reduce it to 10 and still 0.5 micron, that is 500 nanometers, right? So the size of the particle is decreased. So the specific surface area A will be increased. So this is the first advantage of nanonization. Second, when the particle size is decreased, you see here in the diagram, if it is a bigger particle, there is no particle curvature. Whereas as you are going on reducing the size of the particle curvature increases, which also enhances the dissolution pressure. And because of this enhanced dissolution pressure, you will have increased saturation solubility. Third advantage it gives is it decreases the diffusional layer distance, that is H, and it increases the concentration gradient, that is CS and CX. So why we are discussing all these three parameters? Because these parameters are the controlling factors for the dissolution rate of the drug according to the Noyes-Whitney equation. So you see here the Noyes-Whitney equation, right? So we know that this is the constant D. So A is increased. This gradient, that is CS minus CX, is also increased and H is decreased. So because of this, you will have a higher dissolution velocity, that is the dissolution rate, that is dC by dt. So ultimately, all the parameters which enhances the dissolution velocity are better given when you go from micronization to the nanonization. Now the second effect after dissolution improvement, the bioadhesion improvement. So we know that when we discuss the particle sizes, there will be more number of contact surfaces. So this particle, if the size of particle is in micron, that is greater than 1 micron, so this type of bigger particles are very large to enter the non-porous mucosal gel layer in the gut. Whereas the nanocrystals, which have usually the size less than 1 micron, they can quickly penetrate into this mucus gel layer. They will be retained for the longer period of time. And they show the increased adhesiveness because of the higher contact area of the small particles. So there will be concentration or accumulation of the particles, which will enhance the drug accumulation and further give rise to the higher diffusion and better absorption. Now, compared to the other nanoparticles, which uses some of the organic solvent or which uses some carriers or polymers, so their properties also affect the nanoparticle performance. But in case of nanocrystal, it is only the drug and stabilizer. So we can say that nanocrystal is 100% drug, no carrier. However, they are needed to be stabilized. This is very, very important parameter in the nanocrystal production, and we will see why the nanocrystals are required to be stabilized. Also, you have a nanocrystal in a liquid form that is known as nanosuspensions. They can be dried, they can be solidified using techniques like spray drying, freeze drying. These two are very widely used techniques to convert the liquid nanosuspensions into solid nanocrystals. And then those solid nanocrystals can be fabricated. As you process your normal drug, you can also process the nanocrystals, and you can have your dosage forms in terms of tablets, capsules, and many other dosage forms, even injectables. Also, the nanocrystals show the reduced fast fade effect. Right? This is a very important parameter because the patient physiological condition will not affect, and the fast fade condition will not affect the absorption of the drug because it is independent of the presence of food, whether the food is present in the stomach or no, whether there is presence of bile salts like sodium taurocholate and sodium glycocholate, which usually helps in dissolving the drug. So these natural factors which can affect the physiological factor of the patients, this nanocrystals performance is not dependent on that. And that's why we can say that nanocrystals can solve biopharmaceutical delivery problems, even for the drugs which show very low bioavailability after oral administration or which show low penetration into the skin. That means it can also improve the dermal delivery. So there is a lot of research work going on for improving the dermal delivery using nanocrystal. However, any of the dermal dosage form which uses the nanocrystal is not available in the market. Sometimes there is, if the solubility of a drug is limited, you may require to use various co-solvents, or you may require large injection volume for its intravenous administration. So this limitation can also be overcome in case of the nanocrystal formulation. So these are all the unique attributes that usually you do not find in other type of formulation approach. Now we come to the nanomilling, which is a top-down technology. As we discussed earlier, in the top-down technology, the two basic approaches are nanomilling and high-pressure homogenization. So we are talking about nanomilling. The most widely used nanomill is known as the wet media mill, which is available in the market. You will find several suppliers with various models. This design of the equipment, which is known as wet media mill or nanomill, it is a matter of engineering work. It is an advanced technology which uses the shear forces that impact the particles to reduce the size so effectively that it can be converted into the nanoscale sizes. So basically, in this equipment, you will have a milling chamber which will contain drug, dispersion medium, which is usually water, and it uses the stabilizer. And milling media, that means various size of the bowls. You might have heard about the bowl mills, right? So you can say that this is the advanced, much more advanced versions of the bowl milling, right? So the milling media, there are so much advancement in the area of in the bowls or the media which is used for the size reduction in this mill. So all this will be loaded in the milling chamber, and then when you run this equipment, there will be generation of the shear forces to produce the nanoscale particle. So basically the shear forces, the impact and attritional forces will cause the particle fracture and reduce the particle sizes. Now this is the basic design, right? So this design have many other variants depending on the production scale size. So what we are showing here is a small equipment for the laboratory research. So you see here the milling chamber, right? If it is a very small tabletop equipment, then they will give you a small jar in which you can load the slurry that is consisting of your drug and water and stabilizers, and then you have to run the machine. So once it is run, you will have the screen here. If the milling media is very small size, we should not allow it to mix with the product. So there may be sometimes in the mills you will find the screen, right? So it depends what size, what is the specific aim of your research, what is the target product profile. So selection of mill depends on that. What is the particle size that we require? What is the particle size range that we want to produce, right? So based on that, there will be either you can introduce the coolant so that there will not be generation of heat, and even it can be used for the thermolabile substances, right? Because we know that it's a high energy input is required. So in that case, there will be generation of the heat. So there are coolants available in the mills, which will always keep the temperature minimum so that the thermolabile substances will not be affected and you can process. So that limitation can also be overcome by using different type of milling design. So ultimately, you will have drug nanoparticles. So this, what you get here is the nano suspension because you have used liquid here, right? So you will get the nano suspension, and that nano suspension, if required, can be further used for the solidification by spray drying or freeze drying. Now, we say that why we don't use the dry milling, why we use the wet media milling, because when you use the dry mill, when you use only, we don't use any dispersion medium or liquid, then the particle size reduction is not so effective. You cannot achieve the particle size reduction up to this much lower size. And that's why the wet media milling is quite more effective compared to the dry milling. And the media or bowls that you are used for the particle size reduction, they are very important because they will be continuously in contact with your drug. So what material is used for the bowl is very important. Also, the particle size reduction is a function of the bowls, the size of the bowl that you are using. Right? So the material of the bowl and the size of the bowl, these two are very important parameters. So you see here in the figure that you must use the correct particle size to bead size ratio for effective particle size reduction. If you use the beads which are very small in size, that means less than 0.01 millimeters. So this may not provide the enough impact because they will be lighter in weight, and they cannot generate sufficient energy for the particle breakage when they impact the drug particles. And that's why they are not suitable for milling. When you use very large beads, so because they are larger in size, they cannot generate appropriate collisions for the particle breakage. There may be collisions between the bowls rather than between the bowl and the drug particle. Right? So that very big size also is not suitable. So the bead size usually used is between 0.1 millimeter to 12 millimeters for all the applications. But if we talk about the pharmaceutical applications, usually we use the bead size between 0.2 to 0.4 millimeters in a normal laboratory scale equipment. Now, there are many advancements in the milling media. So we will see what is new in milling media. So the size and material. As I told you, these two things are very, very important. So milling media of smaller dimensions have been attempted by many researchers. That means the media dimensions or the diameter of the bowls that you use is less than 0.1 millimeter. However, when you use so much of small beads, then it will be mixed. It is difficult to separate from the milled product which is present in the chamber. So this type of arrangement can be done using this. How you can separate very small size build from media from the product. So you have to separate them by centrifugation. So the inbuilt centrifugation technology is also available inside the milling when you are planning to use very small size beads. Otherwise, you can screen your nano suspension product and separate out the bowls. For example, the one company that is known as the Kotobuki Industries in the Japan, they used ultra apex mill, and in this mill there was integrated centrifugal technology which separates the milling media, and they used the media between 15 to 100 micrometer. From the milled product, by centrifugation, the milling bowls can be separated. And they use this technology for various drugs like albendazole, danazole, omeprazole, probucol, and they have good enhancement of the dissolution and absorption properties. Also, at the same time, we can say that the material of the milling because it will be in contact. It will be giving a high attrition. So there should not be any corrosion or any particle rupture. The rupture of the balls or the material erosion that will mix with the product. So usually what they are doing now is the yttria stabilized zirconia balls. This is the most widely used. They coat it with the yttrium and the ball material is zirconia. So this problem can be minimized up to much higher extent, and they are very successfully used for the nanomilling operation. Now, if you carry out this research, you need to pay attention on some of the critical process parameters that we say when you want to optimize this. However, these parameters are not generalized. It can be different for each and every drug. Depending on the physicochemical parameters of the particular drug, you have to set these parameters. Like what milling time you will be using. So starting from 1 hour to 5 days, milling time can be used. So longer milling time, if it is used, then you will get the more monodispersed particles. And if you use too long milling times, then it may cause aggregation. So milling time also is required to be optimized. And it is also correlated with the milling speed, right? So when you use the higher milling speed, it will increase the milling rate and you will achieve the smaller particle sizes. At the same time, the milling medium, that is the size of the beads and the amount of bead, is also important. How many beads should be placed in the chamber for a single particle size reduction operation of a one batch, right? So smaller beads you use, you will have better particle size. You will get smaller nanocrystals. Higher amount of beads if they are using, it improve the milling efficiency. Too high bead amount should be avoided because it may increase the contamination. Drug amount up to as small as 5% to 40% can be loaded in the milling chamber. If you use very small drug amount, it may increase contamination and it lowers the milling efficiency. And if you use very high drug amount, it increases the viscosity. The viscosity of the liquid, a nanosuspension will become very high. And because of higher viscosity, the milling efficiency can also be decreased. The stabilizer, one of the very, very important parameter again. The ratio is very important. So several ratios can be attempted for the drug, and you may have significant effect, not only on the sizes, many other effects have been reported, like even effects on the pharmacokinetic parameters, because some stabilizer like TPGS, they have very good effect themselves also. Okay? So what type of stabilizer you will select is a question, and what is the ratio of the drug to stabilizer. For example, wide range is used, 2:1, up to 20:1 can be used for the drug stabilizer ratio. Now, sometimes we think that even though we are using the particle size reduction approaches, it will be not in form of amorphous particle, right? But some particles you may get in amorphous forms, which usually we do not want while milling operation. So what we say that it is a problem which is known as the milling induced amorphization. We think that amorphous form is always better because it will give better solubility, but think about the stability of the dosage form, because amorphous form is very unstable. It always try to convert, right? So there will be interconversion from the amorphous to the crystalline during the storage, which is not desirable, because once there is interconversion from the amorphous toward the crystalline, it will affect many properties like particle size distribution, and that's why the specific surface area, physicochemical properties and reactivity, dissolution, and ultimately the overall performance of the drug product. And that's why we want to reduce it. Especially this milling induced amorphization is observed at a particular critical particle threshold, which will be different based on the mill design. Critical particle threshold mills means even if you give more energy, you run the mill for longer period of time, you cannot reduce the particle size below certain level, which is known as the critical particle threshold. So once the critical particle threshold is reached, and then if you still going on running the mini, that means you are transferring the mechanical energy from the mill to the particles. And this additional mechanical force will cause the defects and disordering of the crystal structure. And it may give an amorphous layer surrounding the crystalline core of the particle. And we want to reduce that because we don't want the crystalline to amorphous conversion. So sometimes if it is a big problem, in that case, you can carry out the co-milling with the crystalline excipient like adipic acid or magnesium stearate or the polyvinyl pyrrolidone, etc. So when you co-mill your drug with this crystalline excipients, the excipient itself will turn amorphous. And we know that if they are amorphous, again, they will be transformed into crystalline structure, right? And when they convert into crystalline structure, this single crystal will act as a crystal nuclei for the conversion of amorphous drug to the recrystallized. So ultimately what we want to get is a smaller size nanocrystals rather than amorphous form of the particles. Now see the instability, right? We think that everything is good about the nanocrystals, but the instability is a problem that must be paying attention, right? So first of all, what causes the instability in the nanocrystal formation? Because we know that we are reducing the particle size below certain level, right? So when you reduce the particle size, the huge, massive surface area is available, right? Which results in the high surface free energy. And because of high surface free energy, there will be presence of the surface charges, right? So when they have surface charges, because of the van der Waals forces, there will be particle-particle attraction. Because of that attraction, there will be aggregation of the particle. So this is one sort of instability. The second instability, which is very common in this process, is the Ostwald ripening, or which is known as the crystal growth. So in this case, what happens? The smaller size particle, we know that there will be a polydispersed particle range. Each and every nanocrystal in the milling chamber will not be of equal size. So the smaller particles will going on dissolving in the water. So once it will reach the saturation solubility, after which any particle will not be able to dissolve. So what that particle will do? They will be deposited on the bigger particles. So what will happen? There will be deposition of the smaller particle on the surfaces of the larger particle. So you can say that the larger particle will become still larger at the expense of the smaller particle. So this is required to be avoided. So this two instability must be addressed using the surfactant. So what causes instability is when the particle try to come together, they want to approach each other. So we have to work on this. We have to remove this particle attraction. So for this, what approach we use is the stabilization. So if it is positive, there will be a negatively charged. If it is negative surface charge, it will be a positively charged surface coating using either polymer or surfactant. So there will be a coated layer of the stabilizer, which will prevent the two particles coming together. And this is how you can avoid the aggregation of the particles. Now see the stabilization based on whether you are using a surfactant, that is ionic surfactant, or you are using a polymer, or you are using a combination. So basically there are three types of stabilization, that is electrostatic, when the surfactant or the charged ionic amphiphile particle will be adsorbed onto the particle surface of the drug, and they will impart the mutual repulsive forces between particles. Say, for example, sodium lauryl sulfate or sodium dodecyl sulfate is used. Steric stabilization is provided when you use the polymers like HPMC or PVA, PVPK15 or poloxamer, etc. Then this polymer will get absorbed onto the particle surface and it will give the electrostatic charge. Then if you use both of this, then it will be a combination. So combination is proved to be better compared to use of the single surfactant, because it has been shown by the experimentation that electrostatic will give you better protection, better stabilization. So combination of both you can use, one surfactant and one polymer can be used at a time. Now, if how the concentration of the stabilizer is important, right? Although they are used at a very slow, very low concentration, they are still very significant, because if you use the insufficient stabilizer concentration, there will not be effective particle coating and there will be particle aggregation. So that is instability, we don't want it. If you are using overdose stabilizer or higher concentration of the stabilizer is a surfactant or a water soluble polymer. So what it will do, it can also lead to solubilization of the particle, and which will lead to the Ostwald ripening. And that's why you have to use the optimum stabilizer concentration. A lot of research work is available on surfactant and polymer and combinations, that for a particular type of drug, what type of surfactant you have to use. Now coming to the merits, although we have already seen what are the merits of the wet media milling and what are the demerits, so we can summarize that for the merits, it is useful for all the insoluble drug, whether it is not soluble in aqueous media, or any non-aqueous solvent is not required. No organic solvent is required. It is relatively easy to scale up. It has better reproducibility. There is minimal batch-to-batch variation. It has narrow size distribution, and also high drug loading is possible. Whereas the demerits include that the equipment is a costly process. The manufacturing is a costly process because the equipment itself is costly. High energy requirement with long duration of milling, and there can be destabilization of the drugs due to high shear forces and temperature. So the shading of the surfactant must be avoided. Right? Shading of the surfactant means the surfactant will be detached from the particle. So if it detached, again, there will be instability problems. There will be risk of contamination from the dispersant media. So with the advanced engineering solutions, some of these factors have already been minimized up to a great level. Now, whenever we formulate something, we must know their characterization. So nanocrystals, after wet media milling or any other method, nanocrystals characterization methods are almost same. So basically for the three properties, they can be characterized. First is particle size, shape, and morphology. Second parameter that they must be evaluated is solid state properties and chemical stability. Whereas third one is the drug release and solubility. So various imaging techniques, non-imaging techniques, various thermal analysis, spectroscopic techniques, or the chromatographic methods are used. And for the drug release, you can use the solubility and dissolution testing. Now, if you use the particle size and you use the non-imaging technique, the DLS, the dynamic light scattering, is a very widely used method for the particle size determination. So when you use the DLS, usually we use the, nowadays the zeta sizers are also available, which will measure at a time both the particle sizes, the polydispersity index, as well as the zeta potential. Right? So zeta sizer are also available. For example, Malvern zeta sizer is a very widely used laboratory equipment for the characterization. Also, when you want to determine the particle shape and morphology, usually we use the imaging technique like SAM and TAM, or the atomic force microscopy, etc. So although they are time consuming and only can be applied to the solid sample, but if you want to find out, or you want to study the shape or particle morphology, these techniques are important. Especially the TAM is more effective technique when we talk about nano. Surface properties. So either you can have the surface idea from the imaging techniques, or you can also study the zeta potential for the surface properties, especially for the surface charges. Then solid state properties, like we can use various spectroscopic methods for the solid state characterization. DSC, just now I came across a research paper which says that DSC is not so effective and sometimes it gives the misleading results when we talk about the nanocrystals. However, it can be used as a supportive technique. Not anything can be concluded based on the DSC only. However, XRD is a very important because it is all about crystalline, right? So you can also identify or you can calculate the crystallinity index or what is the amount of crystallinity and what is the percentage of amorphousness in that when you go for the quantitative XRD. You can use the IR solid state nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, that is SSNMR, etc. Also, the HPLC method is used to find out the chemical stability or any degradation in the product when you carry out the stability studies. And dissolution and solubility testing, you can use the orbital shaker or you can use the dissolution apparatus. Now coming to the size related risk and persistence related risk. Now we think that everything is good about nano. When we think about nano, we think that they are very sophisticated technique, they are very safe. But safety is a question because when we consume either in form of ingestion, inhalation or injectable, in all this, we should know that what is the in vivo fate of the nanocrystals. Right? So in general, nanoparticles, because it is all about the size that we are talking. And another thing is the persistency. That means whether the nanocrystals or nanoparticles will be biodegradable or not. So based on the size and based on its persistency, they may impart some risk. So we will divide it into two, whether the nanoparticles or based on size, whether they are risky or not risky, right? Why we consider this two factor when we talk about the in vivo fate or when we talk about the nanotoxicity, right? Because nanotoxicity always is a concern when we talk about the nanoparticles or nanoscale sizes, right? Because when we say nano, we must think that they are smaller in size and they can always enter the cells. And if they enter the cell, they can even damage a single cell or they can also cause the systemic damage. They can irritate the immune system when they are taken up by cells of the immune system. And if this thing happens, there will be systemic side effects, right? So it is important to study the interaction of nanocrystals with the cells and how they can be taken up by the cells when you develop the nanoparticles. So that's why we say that the size related risk must be known. So based on the research which have been carried out, there are some conclusions based on the size that the particle size less than 100 nanometer are at high risk whenever the particle size is greater than 100 nanometer are known as low risk nanoparticles. Right? So now think about all the possible particle sizes and how they can be taken up by the cells. So if we talk about a larger particle like micron sizes, higher micron sizes, not lower micron size, 50 to 100 microns, and they are very large particle with respect to the cells, the size of the cells. The size of the cells ranges between 6 to 10 micrometer, right? So these smaller size cells cannot take up the particles which are larger than that. So there is no risk with the bigger particle that they will be taken up, right? So we forget about that. Now we talk about the nanoparticles, that is 100 nanometer to 1000 nanometer, a broad size range, right? Even it can be up to few micron, right? So they can be taken up by cells. As far as they are smaller than the size of the cells, they can be taken up by the cells, especially those cells which have phagocytic activity. For example, the macrophages of the MPS, that is mononuclear phagocytic system, which is present in the liver and spleen, and also in the Langerhans cells in the skin. Right? So they can be taken up by these particular cells. However, it is not so easy because only a limited number of cells can taken up by the particles, and some of these cells are not easy to access. But whenever we go from still smaller sizes, this take up can become easier. That's why we say that if the nanocrystal particle sizes are bit greater than 100 nanometer, that's why that we say that 100 to 1000 nanometer, they are safer compared to when the particle size is less than 100 nanometers, right? Because they can be taken up by all cells by endocytosis, right? And therefore the toxicity risk the nanoparticles. Now about the persistency is related to the biodegradability, or whether they will be biodegradable or not, they will be remaining forever. Say for example, carbon nanoparticles, right? CNTs, carbon nanotubes. So they cannot be used for the human beings, right? So biodegradable are low risk because they degrade in the body. They can be eliminated out by the excretory system. Whereas if the particles are biopersistent, that means they are not biodegradable, do not eliminate it from the body. They are very large to be eliminated via kidney. And that's why once they internalize in the cells, once they enter the cells, is easy because they are smaller in size. So they can easily taken up by the cells. But themselves, it is hard for the particles to come out of that cells. In that case, these biological cells in which these particles resides, our biological cells will serve as a waste deposit site for this nanoparticle. And depending on the material, for some metal nanoparticles, it is especially more toxic. Now compared to the advanced modifications in nanocrystals, right? So till now we were talking about enhancing the solubility. So here we are not talking about some drugs which have a little solubility problem and that can be modified using simple approaches, solid dispersions or complexation, or conventional approaches like spray drying or production of the amorphous particle. We are talking about the drugs which have very low solubility. In that case, the bioavailability is very limited, right? So for that, it is a proven approach. Nowadays, with advancing research efforts, there are several modifications in nanocrystal field have been reported, like you can get the ultra small particle sizes for fast drug release. Right? Usually we say that by using nanomilling, it is hard to achieve particle sizes less than 100 nanometer. But there are some mill design, right? Specific mill designs. And when you use a very small size of the bills, the beads or the milling media, it is possible to have the sub 100 nanometer particle. That means particle below 100 nanometers. Now, if you still want to improve the efficiency of the nanomilling, you can go for the pre-treatment of the raw drug material. That means before using the nanomilling operation, what we do, we first pre-treat the drug molecule, right? How? You can either use the spray drying or use the freeze drying, rotary evaporation, or you can use the quench cooling method. And then that particle will be exposed for the wet media milling operation. Right? So when we go for the pre-treatment of the raw drug material, what it will do, it will alter the solid state property of the drug particle from the crystalline, which is regular, to the amorphous and irregular state. Right? So it will reduce the crystallinity with the irregular molecular arrangement compared to the crystal state. So once you are loading the smaller size of the particle, there are better chances that you will get still improved sizes of the nanocrystals. Again, when there is, instead of crystalline, when you use the amorphous particle, right, the behavior of this particle toward the impact and attrition or the mechanical forces will be different. Say, for example, the crystal API will show the breakage point on the surface boundaries, right? Compared to the amorphous API, which reflects the molecular arrangement, which is modified. So theoretically, if you see, The nanomilling of the amorphous API and crystal API will be quite different. And there are so many of the patented technologies which are reported. You see in this table, the particle technology, although only one is used, where the bead milling or the media milling is used for the pre-treatment, followed by the high pressure homogenization. Both are the top-down approaches only, right? So you can go for pre-treatment and then you can go for main treatment. This type of combination technology, they are quite used and most of them are patented. Another advanced modification approach in the nanocrystal is the when you use the solidification for the downstream processing of the nanocrystals. Say, for example, you use the spray drying, freeze drying. These two are very widely used solidification approaches. So when you use this drying process, again, you are required to control the process parameter of the spray drying. For example, what is the spray rate? What is the organic solvent? What is the carrier that you need to add? Here you need to add the carrier if you use the spray drying, and you used to need the cryoprotectant if you use the freeze drying method, right? Then you have to control the critical process parameters for the solidification technologies. You have to use the combination of stabilizer, or you can use some novel stabilizers. Either plant-based stabilizer can also be used nowadays, or the other novel synthetic molecules can be used as stabilizer. You can use the combination of surfactant and polymer for better stabilization. Another modification is the direct use of nanosuspension as ingredient. So as we talked that nanosuspension, which is the first product in the nanomilling operation, it is liquid in nature, right? Then you go for solidification, and then the solid product is used in tablet and capsule. Instead of this, some researchers have tried direct nanosuspension as a wet agent, and they have mixed it with other excipients, and they have shown very good results in terms of in vivo absorption. Also, the fluidized bed drying is used for the nanosuspension. So it will be dry, and then simultaneously you can coat that dried material onto the sugar spheres. So once you have this layered sugar spheres as a core, that cores can be further coated with the functional polymer. So this can be done if you want to achieve the controlled release from the nanocrystals, because as such nanocrystals will not give you the controlled release. So you have to use other formulation approaches to get advantage of the nanocrystal in terms of controlled release. Another approach is the nanocrystal loaded in carriers for the controlled drug release. Like you can use the carrier-free approach also, or you can use some of the medium for the drug delivery as we discussed. You can use the carrier. Here we are not talking about a single polymer. Carrier, that means the dosage form which is used to deliver. So this dosage form can be fabricated using the nanocrystals. Tablet, capsule, injectables are already available in the market. Many researchers have tried some topical formulations like creams or gels, or transdermal patches have also been tried for the modified release. And a very interesting one is for the active targeting. Right. So sometimes we can use the cells, biological cells like RBCs, right? So we can use the restilled erythrocyte approach, right? So we can use the hypotonic hemolysis, in which the first the RBCs are ruptured, and then the drug nanocrystals are loaded into them. Then again they are put into the saline solution where they will be sealed, and then they are used as a carrier. So this will show better biodegradability and better acceptance because they are natural components. So it will also reduce the toxicity. Also, some researchers have tried the functionalization in terms of the receptor attachment to the nanocrystal, like folate receptor, for those cancers which overexpresses the folate. Whereas some research efforts have also been used for the stimuli responsive drug delivery system using the nanocrystal. For example, the pH responsive nanocrystals have been formulated. But all these are the research efforts. Now, if you talk about the market potential, because we say that it is a very industrially feasible approach. So why we say it's an industrially feasible approach? Because several companies have tried this nanomilling as a reformulation approach, and they have filed applications to the FDA. So most of them you can see which have been filed between 73 to 2020. That is, the oral is the highest one. Maximum applications have been filed for the oral route of administration, followed by intravenous, intramuscular, ocular, intraperitoneal, and intratumoral route of administration. Also, several research efforts have tried the nanocrystal incorporated dosage forms like tablet, capsules, injectables by various routes, suspensions, emulsions, and powder for inhalations. At the same time, although there are so many of prospective research available, here I am citing very good research results from a group that is for the enhanced bioavailability of the aprepitant. This drug is used to use in the cancer chemotherapy, which to reduce the nausea and vomiting. So when aprepitant was size reduced, you see here in the graph, the size reduced from the 5.5 micron to 1.8, 0.48, and 0.12. So 0.12 is 120 nanometers, which is a nanomilled product. So you can see that the much significant improvement in the nanomilled product when we talk about the plasma concentration, that is the higher plasma concentration, that means higher absorption and higher bioavailability. At the same time, it has a very good effect on the fast fade state. That means it will eliminate the deviations because of the fade or fasted state. So one such study reported a drug, megestrol acetate, which is an appetite stimulant. And this drug was used on the healthy males under the clinical trials. And you see here in the research, this is the original suspension, the macro suspension, and the dose was 800 mg in 20 ml. Whereas in case of nanocrystal dispersion, the dose was 625 mg in 5 ml. So here you see the fasted state, the absorption is quite low compared to the fed state. So there is a significant differences in the absorption when the drug is taken in fasted state and fed state. You see here, in case of the fasted state and fed state, there is no significant difference if you see the maximum plasma concentration here. So we can say that the fast fed conditions are also eliminated with the nanocrystal production. These are the FDA-approved nanomill oral dosage forms. You can see here the table brand, which API or drug is used, what dosage form, for what disease it is indicated, and what the company who owns this technology. So you see here all the oral solutions or tablet, suspension, etc., all the oral dosage forms. Whereas in case of the parenterals, you see here usually the intravenous infusion, intramuscular injection, intravenous, intramuscular, 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 intravenous. No other than intravenous and intramuscular have been still approved for the market. Now, based on all this, we can say that the nanomilling is a universal first-line approach for the solubilization, irrespective of the route of administration, irrespective of the solubility properties of the drug. The only criteria that you want to improve is the poor solubility of the drug. Now, that's why, because of its scalability, its reproducibility, carrier-free and solvent-free approach, you can say that it's a very appealing and effective approach. And that's why many of the pharmaceutical companies have used this approach for the existing drugs reformulation. You know that when some drugs patent is going to be expired, so in that case, what the companies do, because some products are very good revenue generator for a company, right? So in that case, what they do, before its patent expiration, they try its reformulation and they again extend its patent period. Because when you use the nanocrystals, its pharmacokinetic will be quite different compared to the original. Also for the new chemical entity. So sometimes when you have a lead molecule, which is very potential otherwise, which have very good pharmacological potential, but it has a problem in terms of solubility, right? So you need not to worry about solubility and need not to change any structural features of that molecule, and you can just pay attention on its efficacy and safety. And for the solubility problem, the nanomilling approach can be used. And that's why both industry and academia have embraced this technology, nanomilling, for production of nanocrystal. And that's why the nanocrystal is expected to advance even further in the future, with especially in terms of the targeting applications and to achieve the particle sizes less than 100 nanometers. So these two we can see as the future research areas in the nanomilling field. We have recently got funding for this project on the nanocrystal and nanomilling. We are going to use the RECH nanomill, which is PM100 model for our laboratory. And we will be using the spray drying and freeze drying as the solidification approach. For this project, my collaborators are Dr. Torsten Selzer, who is associate professor in my school, and he's also a co-director of the Crystallization Design Institute at Molecular Science Research Center here in Puerto Rico. Dr. Eliud Hernandez, he is the chair of our department, and Professor Yashwant Pathak, he is the associate dean in the University of South Florida, USA. This is the School of Pharmacy where I work. This school was established in 1913, so it is more than 100 years old. And Puerto Rico is a beautiful island, which is a United States territory between the United States and Caribbean region.